Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Stowe Talks. Today we have the wonderful Sarah Weller, who's going to talk us through supporting neurodiverse children through divorce. How are you doing, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Hello,
Wonderful.
everyone.
Wonderful. Bit of normal sort of things that we've gone through at the start of the webinar. The chat function is going to be available. The Q&A function is going to be available. Please put any questions in there that you want at the end. I think we're going to probably find it quite difficult in the time that we're given to go through specific examples. So I think it's probably best that you don't put your scenario down and then expect Sarah to sort of summarize that for you. It's probably going to be a lot more in depth, and it's the kind of thing you're probably going to need to sort of look into in more depth at some point. But generic questions, I think, would really be good on this topic. It's a very interesting area, and I'm sure that Sarah will be happy to sort of give some guidance on more generic areas. So if that would help. Can we keep the chat nice and friendly? I know we always do, but it's always worth saying. And the other thing here is that Sarah's going to talk about an area where it's going to be advisable to potentially work together for the best interest of children. Sarah, myself, the firm, we know that that doesn't suit every single scenario. So what we don't want to do is cause any upset today by saying this is the only way to do it, because that's not the case. Sarah is just going to be talking through one way in which she believes can work if all parties are on board. So please take some self-care and compassion on this one today. No upset is intended by anything that's being said. It's just one route that Sarah believes can work if everyone's engaged in the same sort of path and moving forward together. So that being said, Sarah, as soon as you're ready, by all means, get started.
Hello, thank you, Ashley, for the introduction. So Ashley's touched on language, and I'm going to try as much as possible, and it'd be my intention to keep all my language neurodivergent inclusive. However, there may be at times, for want of not finding any other better words or more appropriate words, I may talk about difficulties and challenges. So first off, just debunking why I've used the word neurodiverse rather than neurodivergent. I thought this can be helpful for some people. That neurodiverse is a collective word, so we are talking about children. Whereas if I was talking about a child, I would be referring to them as neurodivergent. So that's just that little bit of housekeeping. And because sometimes, people are sensitive about the particular words that we use. So I'm going to gloss over this because you're going to have the slides. And so just to say, I'm a mum of 4 neurodivergent children, and I'm married to Paul, who is also neurodivergent, and the jury's out about me. So I'm not sure. Just quirky, shall we say. My background is in the homelessness sector and the mental health sector, and I've been in private practice for about 8 years now. I never set out to declare myself in any way an expert on anything. I learn from my own experiences as a mother and a wife, and I learn from my experience from my clients who teach me an awful lot. So that is a little bit about me. So tonight, just this little structure, what we're going to be talking about, why are we having this conversation, why is it important to talk about particular support needs of neurodivergent children and neurodivergent families. What is neurodiversity? I'm going to put a little bit of research in because I know you lawyers love research and evidence. And we're going to sort of talk a little bit about autism and a little bit about ADHD because they're very often co-occurring with each other. For neurodivergent children, change is huge. And so I'm going to talk about why and what things can help, and then give you some practical tips about how to, transition a very tricky time for you if you're a parent on this call and navigating a divorce. So please, I encourage you to have some self-compassion tonight and some self-care around yourself. So the research, all the research says that there is no significant impact on children per se when their parents divorce. It is the impact on children regarding their well-being is when the conflict continues openly or there's parental alienation. So there's no research also that states single caregiving it will affect a child's well-being either. Every child needs one significant adult where they feel securely attached to. So as I said, it's not the divorce per se, but what happens next, and trying to ensure that there's, you get all the support you need for your family and yourself. I've put the reference there if you want to look up that research. It's interesting that most of my clients, there is a big often gender difference in when they come to see me, and why parents are struggling with parenting in general. That often mum will talk about being interested in helping children regulate, and will be connecting with their emotions and worried about that. And men will often be worried about behavioural problems. So this can often cause a rupture in the parenting approach, which will increase stress in the family system. And there is evidence to say that parents with neurodivergent children are more likely to divorce because of that, because of what's the word? I can't say it. You can't solve your differences. What's the big word for it, Kate? Irreconcilable. That's it. Differences. So what is neurodiversity? It's an umbrella of terms and conditions, but really it affects the brain in different ways. So it's a difference in the way you process, in the way you experience the world, in the way you experience relationships, in the way that you understand communication, in the way that you give communication, in the way that you process sensory input. One description I like to describe it is that you're wearing your nervous system on the outside without robust filters, whereas another more neurotypical person sort of will wear their nervous system on the inside, so there's a little bit more barrier to sensory input. I know I've just noticed this slide uses the word disorder. I don't like the word disorder. I think it's not neurodivergent affirming, although still we have these words in the DSM-5, and we have a lot of diagnosis assessments using those words, but it's not helpful for anyone who's going through that process for that word. So we don't say autism spectrum disorder anymore. We say autism spectrum condition, which is, I think, a lot kinder. So neurodiversity is a collective name for brain differences, and it's a word to explain the unique ways people's brains are, their neurology. It's not one condition with one set of differences, which you can sort of take that, some people take that academic approach that if you're autistic, this is how you are. If you have ADHD, this is how you are. But we know now that's not the case. If you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. And that's what's so important to remember. It's a collection of related differences that are all intertwined, and the common challenges are related to emotional regulation, executive functioning, self-esteem, sense of belonging, and communication, the way we and processing. So what is executive functioning, and why is it so important on this webinar to sort of get a grasp? You may already know, but executive functioning is what we need to go about our daily business every day, to go to school, to work, to listen, to communicate, to get things done. And this, so executive functioning is where the differences occur within neurodivergency. And what can happen is when children or adults are under stress or very anxious about a situation, executive functioning can lower. And that's when you will start maybe seeing some differences in behaviours or ability to do things, and it's because the anxious brain has sort of taken over and the executive functioning's gone offline. So I'd just like you to sort of have this in mind when I start talking about the impacts, because executive functioning will explain and be behind a lot of behaviours that you might see. So one of the differences in neurodivergency is relational, and I just sort of tried to explain it in a simple metaphor about maps and why we struggle with relationship. So we have a me map, that's understanding ourselves. That's about getting our own needs met. That's about sort of having our own perspective and our own sense of what's going on for us. We have a you map, which is when we can understand what's going on for you, what's going on for the other person. And that's where empathy comes in. And then we have a we map. That's about, because I understand your perspective and I understand what's going on for you, then we can come up with a solution. We can come up with a compromise. And what happens in trauma when there's change, when I mean by trauma, where there's a change, where somebody doesn't have the skills to cope with that trauma, we can revert back to a me map. So it's all about me, and that's not necessarily, I'm talking about from a selfish point of view, but it's a way of an individual trying to get their needs met at all costs. So I think that's very relevant in the divorce process, not only for children, but possibly for adults as well. And so what we see in that presentation of the we map and it coming back to me is that many neurodivergent individuals have what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and that is a heightened sense of rejection. Now, that may be real rejection, but that also may be a perceived or imagined sense of rejection. It has a strong connection to autism and ADHD, and also dyslexia and a lot of other differences. It can affect the nervous system and triggers a variety of symptoms, including irrational and negative thinking about oneself. So this really is probably the one thing that may cause the biggest sort of difficulty for children, is that when you are talking about, the next steps in divorce, children can often miss out all the explanations you may be giving about your breakdown in your relationship, and that it's about you, but they internalize it that it's about them and you are leaving them. So that's can explain a heightened behind what can be a heightened emotional dysregulation, and a hypersensitivity to everything that's going round. And so I'm going to give you ways later on about minimizing this, because for that person it's very real, it's very heightened, it's very raw, and it's very wounding. For the person who is trying to explain and communicate, often, obviously, there is no deliberate intention to hurt, to wound, or to reject. There is none. You are not, that is not your intention to do that. But you are communicating to a filter that is receiving limited information about rejection and how that is interacting with their sense of self. So again, it's a heightened me map and less of a you map and what's going on for you. It can also really be rejection sensitivity dysphoria, a major part of divorce, actually, if you are neurodivergent yourself. Because even though one of your partner may not be intending to hurt you, you are receiving that as hurt. So when I coach couples, this often does come up, and it's a much misunderstood sort of thing. It's not about what you're saying, it's about what that person is internalizing it as. So with neurodivergency, the three things that are mainly different are thinking patterns. I'm not going to go through them all because you're going to get the slides. Thinking patterns, emotional responses, connecting to those thinking patterns, and then as a result of thinking patterns and emotional responses, behavioral patterns. So, and this is where the executive functionings come in as well to support emotional regulation, thinking. So understanding cause and effect is a big executive functioning. And because neurodivergent brains have a heightened response to fear, you can get a lot of catastrophizing about the future, which is why the way you manage the telling your children is so important. And I'm going to give you a slide on how to keep it very factual and simple. I'm in the middle of a tricky situation at the moment where I'd seen a lovely boy a few years ago, and his mum contacted me to say, could he come again? Because sadly they're getting divorced, and she'd like him to have a space to process his emotions. Anyway, the dates have changed because she had agreed with her husband to tell them today, and so he was going to come tomorrow. But the husband has gone to Ascot, so they're not able to have that meeting. So she is very worried because she is living a lie because he's moved out, and he the son thinks that his dad is working away from home on business. So she's very anxious, wanting it to be a joint, they tell them together, but also there's been a disruption to that, and now she doesn't want to interfere with trust by living a lie. So when she tells her son, he will say, well, why have you lied to me? So, it's a very, very tricky situation. And the overarching, we've got a lot of specific ways of perhaps doing things and some like specific ideas, but the overarching thing to keep in mind is retaining relationship, retaining connection, retaining attachment. And the main things that interfere with that is untruth, lying, and lack of trust. So if there's anything that, despite all this, detail on the slides, the main thing to go away to think about is through the divorce process is to try and prioritize attachment and connection and relationship, whether you're able to do that together or not. That is the main sort of point of what I try and help people to do. And of course, that's difficult, isn't it? When you've got some, you're under stress yourself with the divorce process, and you've got all your heightened emotions as well. And then you've got children's heightened emotions and probably maybe some challenging behaviors. You may see more immature behaviors and almost a regression as well. And that's fine. That's absolutely to normalize that. And maybe that your child may just need to be treated as a younger child. Not to be, well, you're 15, you should be able to, manage this or do that on your own, or, go with that. Lean into that sort of, maybe they'll want more help, more they might be more clingy to you, and they may be demonstrating some sort of quite babyish behaviors. That's all very, very normal. It's about connecting and attuning with where they are at, rather than thinking, you're 15, this is what you should be able to do. It's meeting that need and connecting with whatever age they're presenting, and whatever you think that they're needing right now. So attunement in the present time leads to also very significantly leads to secure attachment. So I'm not going to go through all of this because, as I said, you'll get the slides, but this is the specifics, how I would recommend you do it. Obviously, it might not be possible. It might not be possible in my client's situation. I think she's going to have to do it on her own. And obviously, I'm not telling you to use these words, please use, be authentic. The whole thing is to be totally authentic. Children, more neurodivergent children, more than anything, need certainty. So as try and keep things very factual and give them detail about what life might look like afterwards. Stress that it's not about them, and reassure them that they aren't responsible for the separation, because particularly with ADHD, we can get a lot of fantastical thinking, and trying to make sense of really complex situations by bringing it back to themselves and, what their part and it sort of, them feeling responsible. Probably in this slide, the most important thing I would draw your attention to is don't make promises you can't keep. So if you're not sure on something, don't wing it. Just say you don't know, because it's devastating when children, neurodivergent children, take you at your literal word, and they're very trusting, and they interpret what you say as truth, and that's how it will be. And again, going back to an example of one of my clients, Daddy made a promise that when they come to live with him at the weekends, they will have their own room and they'll have their own wardrobe and chest of drawers, etc., etc. Daddy had a baby quite quickly with his new partner, and baby went into that room, and baby's clothes are in the chest of drawers, and etc., etc. My client's daughter is beyond grieving and is inconsolable about this because she feels she doesn't have a room and her daddy's home is not her home. She has been, in her words, replaced. So that's just an example. Obviously, life goes on, and you can't, control those outcomes. But what I'm saying is, don't make a promise that they will have a particular room or, pieces of furniture, because this has repeated and repeated and repeated in her mind and got bigger and got bigger. And now it's become a representation of why she can't trust daddy. So she's 13 and it's become very, very a visceral wound now, and it's impacting her relationship with daddy, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with the baby. So I am not catastrophizing here deliberately, but I'm just pointing out that, again, in my overarching, things to keep in mind, it's about prioritizing relationship, attachment, and openness and authenticity to keep the connection going. So I mentioned how difficult change was, but change is part of life. And we all want our children to develop resilience to manage change. But it's a bit more complicated with the neurodivergent profile. And that's because of the thinking patterns, for example. We want to be perceived as being the same as everyone else rather than different, for that sense of belonging. So again, the client with the baby in the room is like, well, I'm the only one that has divorced parents, even though there are many children in her class who have divorced parents. Again, I talked about needing certainty, and often there is an increase in that need to control. So you can have an escalation in your child perhaps trying to assert control. But behind all of that is anxiety. Anxiety will be driving changes in behavior, changes in thinking patterns, and an increase in needing control or trying to assert control. And it's because of the anxiety is fueled by, I don't know what it will be like. I don't know what will be expected of me in my new home with daddy's new partner. And I don't have an internal reference or guide for this. So these are very real fears and worries for a neurodivergent brain. We've got difficulty in transitions anyway, but then we've got, and that might be even more exacerbated with toing and froing between different situations and new homes. And of course, we've got the role of the sensory system, getting acquainted with a new sensory environment in terms of noise, space. So I had one little boy who kept telling me, no, I love going to daddy's house. I love going to daddy's house. But I can't sleep. And it was because his room was in a much longer sort of landing, so much further away from Daddy than he was in his home when Daddy was there. So it can just be a small change, that the light's not on, it's too dark, it's too far away from Daddy, which maybe we think is not a thing. We maybe not be so attuned that that's an important thing for a child. But when neurodivergency, the sensory system is so highly tuned and hypervigilant all the time. Even hearing those new sounds in a house from the plumbing, all of those gurgles, or maybe sounds from a neighbour's, can all contribute to a child being worried. So it can be really helpful to go through all of that with your child, about what the differences are, and is there anything that they feel uneasy about. To sort of get that out the way in the beginning, I think may help, if that's available for you to do. So I'm sort of talking along the lines of trying to work together, but often that is not available to you. So that's fine. But just in case you are thinking about what is co-parenting, I'm not going to go into it now because I haven't got time really, but this is a good link to follow. It's a document which is a co-parenting plan. I don't know if you use something similar, maybe at Stowe, when you're doing work with clients. I'm not sure. So I guess you're on the call really to find out what children need post-divorce. So it's help with their perception, identifying any for want of a better word, faulty thinking patterns, misconceptions, misunderstandings, fantastical thinking, and particularly thinking about themselves rather than the situation. So we've sort of covered that, how anything that they may be taking any blame or shame on. Help with emotional regulation. There will be inevitably, and to be expected, heightened emotional dysregulation for a time, while that change and the new routine is being established, and that can be difficult to be to manage and cope with, because I expect you've got heightened feelings yourself. So it's about listening and being present. It is not about being fixing. Often divorce throws up things that are not in your control or influence, and are out of your hands entirely, particularly if it's difficult to have a relationship with your ex-partner for the co-parenting. So the most important thing is listening. There's a lovely quote from this book by Jennifer Crowley. I don't know, Ashley, if you want. So, sorry, somebody put it in the notes. It's The Essential Guide to Children and Separation by Jennifer Crowley, and it's a nice down-to-earth book. And there's a quote: "In these kinds of situations, we want so much to do something to make our children feel better. We can feel helpless, heartbroken, angry, and confused ourselves. What really can we offer, we ask? The treasure many of us forget is our presence. Often there is nothing to do but be present for the pain just as it is. And that is to witness your own pain and their pain." And it's about listening. It's not giving advice. It's not telling anyone that it will all be all right, because it might not be all right. There might be problems down the line, but it's off being present in that moment to listen and to understand and to acknowledge that it's a difficult situation. We've talked about help with managing change. It can really help to have similar setups at each house. The rules of the house don't have to be, for want of a better word, or the way you parent per se, don't have to be the same. And that may be because you found that difficult in your relationship in the first place, which has led to the divorce. So if it wasn't able to happen during your relationship, it's unlikely to happen afterwards. However, it is helpful that the children are not treated as guests in where they're staying. So it's helpful that they don't have to pack a bag before they go to whoever's house they go to, that they have everything, all the essentials there. Particularly sort of toiletries, clothes, tech, all of that sort of thing. So it just means that they're just going from one home to another rather than feeling a guest in a different home. As I've said, a strong, attuned, present relationship with either one or both parents. Minimal exposure to conflict, which I know is really hard sometimes in certain situations. As familiar a routine as possible in terms of keeping up with their school routine, their extracurricular routine, their friendship routine, reassurance of unconditional loving, obvious one, and if you can, agreed consistent parenting approach. But that again might not be realistic. When I say things don't necessarily have to be the same, it does help that there are similar boundaries and each parent backs each other up with boundaries, whether that's over tech time or values, whatever. So good enough parenting is the 5 C's. It is about open, non-judgmental, and sensitive communication, cooperation, having a win-win situation, because in some situations it could be win-lose. So when I say win-win, I mean when children are struggling, they will try and assert control and they will try and get their own needs met at any cost. So this is when you might have to be more flexible, more listening, more problem solving together in making solving problems collaboratively. Connection, we've talked about that. Co-regulation, we've talked about that. Being present to help children understand their feelings. And what helps children understand their feelings and process their feelings more than anything else is not problem solving, it's just listening, when we've talked about that, and remaining consistent. And they are probably the most effective things to keep in mind for any child, but particularly the consistency and the cooperation, collaborativeness with neurodivergent children. Because with ADHD, the main driver is status and autonomy. So an ADHD brain will always seek to be pursue their own interests and self, which can be problematical sometimes, but a great strength at other times, huge strength. Autism, the root of the word autos is autonomy, and again, an assertion of autonomy, living life according to my values. And this can often cause rupture in relationship. So the collaborative approach can be very, very helpful, because autonomy and assertion of autonomy, as I said, can be really in overdrive with trauma or change, because a child's trying to claw back control when they feel out of control, even though you're trying your best to smooth the transition for them. A lot of this is about what they're perceiving rather than what's actually factual and real. So how are we doing for time, Ashley?
You've got plenty left, Sarah. You carry on.
Okay, yeah. So I don't particularly like the term resilience, this sort of situation that we're talking about and what families are finding themselves in. But resilience is very different when it's applied to neurodivergency as well. But resilience is all about having my needs met, and I can trust that my needs are being met. And that's when this links in with this overarching, I have people in my life that will support me. And that's very hard, isn't it? So that's the most important thing in life. And Kate, you referred to this in your presentation a while back, is having your tribe around you, is having your support network. So important in this part, process in your life, and that everybody in the process feels as cared for as they can. There will be ruptures, of course. There will be ruptures through heightened emotions, and that we know that rupture isn't a disruptor to relationship as long as there is repair. And so it's not the rupture that is the problem, it's the lack of repair that's the problem. So, we all get stressed, we all get upset, we all scream and shout at our children at times, we all lose the plot, and that's okay, because we're human, but it's the repair that's important. So even when you're having the worst day, it's just prioritizing that repair and that connection with your children. There will always be a difficulty with neurodivergent children managing that change and trying to adjust the new situation. However, I can't emphasize enough the role of, I've said it so many times already, is just being there, listening, being present, helping them feel seen, heard, and understood. And that's a universal need, really. That's not any specific individual. And, so that everyone knows, although they have problems, I know things will get better because I can talk to you and I can trust you to understand. So that's sort of my take on how resilience presents in this situation. It's about it happens through supportive relationships for all parties. So children's adjustment is affected by the quality of their experiences and the well-being of those around them, not by the makeup and structure of their family. And that's what I sort of wanted to end with. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. In my area of law, I probably come across autistic children more than any other sort of area of the neurodiversity. But it's just so interesting to hear that and what they need and how it's best to manage that and their best interests and all of that kind of thing. So thank you so much for taking the time. We all very much appreciate it, I'm sure. So what we normally do at this stage is take a few questions. Normally it's sort of an hour in total. So that gives us about 13, 14 minutes to answer those questions. Does that work for you, Sarah?
yeah, of course, yeah.
Perfect, no problem. So I've got the first one here is, how can I repair the wound of over-promising something? I don't want to replace it with something else that I can't achieve.
Yeah, sorry, Ashley, could you say that again?
Of course. How can I repair the wound of over-promising something? I don't want to replace it with something else that I can't achieve.
No, that's really realistic and authentic as well. So yeah, um, love that. Um, it is about it, we come back to repair and apologizing, and role modeling. We make mistakes, and I'm really sorry. Um, so it does come down to it's not about the thing, but it's about the repair and being honest and attuned and validating their wound. That's so important to recognize. For a child to hear, I recognize how wounded you are with that. And I'm really, really sorry. How can we make this better? How can I make this better for you in a way that it doesn't interfere with our trust and our future relationship? And if they ask for something that you can't promise, like you said in your question, stay very factual. I'm not in a position to do that. I can't do that. Don't explain why. If you're, just try and keep it simple. I'm not able to do that. Does that
I suppose,
make sense?
not having the experience that, say, you do, from the parent's perspective, there also has to be a lot of understanding of the wound that's caused.
Yes.
And
It's about validation.
mm,
So that your child feels seen, heard, and understood, and you're not trying to make things better without addressing where they're at. As soon as a child feels that you understand their perspective and where they're at, then relationship is so much easier.
yeah, I can imagine. It's from a parent's perspective, you never want to purposely cause that upset. And,
No, of
you know,
course you don't.
and in this scenario,
Um,
like you say, that wound can run a lot deeper. And I think you're right. It's openly acknowledging that that's happened and how
and
you're going to repair that.
also remembering that neurodivergent children can bring a whole backpack of wounds to
Mhm.
one situation. So that's what you can be dealing with. It's heightened for them because of everything else that may have happened or be happening. So, for example, I was working with somebody today. They were trying to give their son some feedback. He, in a sense of, rejection sensitivity dysphoria response, said, right, that's it. I'm just going to go away and kill myself. Now, it was just her asking him, could he do a bit more around the house because she wasn't feeling very well. Um, anyway, it escalated, but what she hadn't realized is that he was having a lot of friendship problems at school at the moment. So he's been rejected by his friendship group, and then in that moment he feels rejected by his mum. So that's what I mean. There's transference of other stuff in that moment. So we as a parent might think a child can manage something, and obviously we don't intend to hurt, but they have attached a whole invisible backpack to your situation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Let's move on to the second one I've got here. This is for both of us, but I will obviously lead with you, Sarah. My child wants to be part of the process of negotiations to have sight and control of the outcome. Is this possible in court proceedings? And is it sensible from an emotional regulation side of things?
I have never heard of that happening with a judge and a legal team unless it's child protection. But you're the person probably to answer that one.
Sure, sure. I mean, from my perspective, I would never usually have a child involved in this is how much I want to, time with mum and dad, or mum, this is how much time I want with dad, because I think that even if they're of the ages of 15, 16, I don't think they can fully understand what those decisions will mean in the long term. Now, if we apply that to a neurodiverse child, they are coming from a very specific worldview as to what they want. And in the grand scheme of things, we are still their parents. We still need to decide what is in their best interests. And I think that there is a form of mediation you can do where your child is present. So I think you can have mum, dad, and children there, but I don't think it's involving them in the decision process. It's explaining why they've agreed this pattern and why it's in their best interests that their thoughts and were considered as part of that decision process. I think I see a danger in, and I think you've highlighted it, Sarah, saying, "Oh, we will definitely do it that way." Then it doesn't happen for whatever reason. You then open that wound. It creates a problem that you probably could have avoided. So my view is probably negotiate it openly if possible together, what's in the children's best interests, and then advise them as to why that decision has been made.
Yes, and to follow on from what you've just said, Ashley, I think often children make decisions from their emotional brains
Mhm.
rather than their logical brains. And so it would be very limiting for a child as well, to uphold a decision that they've made when they've been from their emotional brain, and that won't necessarily meet their needs going forwards.
Absolutely agree. And I think that's the reason why we are the parents, and why if the parents don't agree, a judge will make that decision on behalf of children. They then ask for a professional group to become involved to be the voice of the children, so that
Yes.
even if the child verbalizes what they want, the other appropriate adult looks at the entire circumstances and says, "Look, I understand what these children want, but maybe it's not in their best interests to do that." So
Yeah, absolutely. And I have come across some really, really, really um, amazing judges who have written to the children and explained why things are why they are in appropriate information sort of level. When it's been a tricky situation for the children to accept. So I know, that has happened with several clients where it's been really, really difficult, and there's been parental alienation going on. Um, it's been huge for me that the judge has done that.
and I would like to see it more and more, if I'm completely honest, because you get to a point where sometimes, through no fault of their own, or sometimes on purpose, parents will purposely blame the other. And it will be, "Oh, your dad didn't try hard enough, or your mum wasn't allowing me to see you." And when a judge writes to the children, and that is often read out by a school or CAFCAS or a social worker in the circumstance, depending on age, obviously, it gives that completely neutral position of no, I made this decision on your
Yes.
behalf, not your
Mm.
mother, not your father. They both adore you, like my dog. Um, they both adore you and want the best for you, but I have decided that actually this is in your best interest. And it is
Mm.
becoming more and more popular, and I am all for it, to be completely honest.
Mm. Mm.
I think it would help in this specific set of circumstances for a child to understand this is the decision was made. And I don't think it then opens a wound with one parent or the other. It's
Mm.
this is what the decision
Mm.
was made in your best interests. So,
Mm.
no, I agree. I'd love to see that happen more and more. Um,
Mm.
I can see there's a couple of comments in the chat about child inclusive mediation. I am all for it. I am certainly not saying that you shouldn't do it. All I'm saying is, do I want a child to make the decision for their best interests? No, I don't. I want their voice to be heard and
Mm.
it to be factored in. That's what I
Mm.
would think is best for everybody. But we are still the adults. We know what's best, and we make those decisions. And unfortunately, the hard part about parenting is sometimes doing things that your children don't want to do and asking them to do that
Exactly. Mm.
because that's what's in their best interests.
And also when I talk about a child making a decision from their emotional brain, I forgot to say that within neurodivergency, there's often a difference between IQ and EQ, not necessarily the same age. So a child can be perceived to have high IQ, don't like to use the word high functioning, and so one expects their emotional thinking to be the same age, but often the executive functionings, which include emotional intelligence, can be 2 years to catch up, or developmental age, or even more. So there is always that gap to consider as well. That although your child's 13 maybe and entering adolescence, their neurology is still functioning around, could be 10, 11.
Of course. And that's, there's so many factors to take into consideration. So, I am, just to make clear, I'm certainly not saying child inclusive mediation is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. But just to make sure that the view is factored in, but the decision made is in their best interests. And if that goes against what they've said, they will understand that as they get older and they sort of come across those own adult sort of issues themselves. We have had a question, another one here. You and I are probably going to have different approaches, Sarah, so I think it's probably you best go first. My son, who has autism, doesn't like going to his dad's. He cries, screams, and begs not to go there. What do you do in this situation?
This is a very common scenario that I work with families, and a tricky one and a tough one,
Mm,
because it's horrible to watch your child in distress. However, again, it may be worth considering the why. There may be all sorts of whys. And neurodivergent children are prone to avoid situations that are anxiety producing or fearful rather than lean into them for their own survival purposes. So I think, first of all, it's trying to get everybody's perspectives. Now, depending on whether you have an open communication with your partner that he doesn't want to go to, speak to him about what his perspective is without any blame or judgment or perceived criticism, so that you don't get a approach from defensiveness. Seek to understand where your child is coming from. sometimes it can come down to a very, what we might think, minor thing, but they have blown it up as a very significant thing. Now, when I say blown up, I don't mean that to be disrespectful. I just mean their mindset has, you know, is exaggerating and catastrophizing over perceived reality. So if that's the first thing, to try and break down what is it? Is it a relational issue? Is it an environmental issue? Is it a sensory issue? We talked a bit about that. Or is it that their needs are not being met? So I think it's to seek to understand and first. Sometimes it can be you let me game a lot more than dad, so dad won't let me game, so I don't want to go there. So, you know, it is first of all seeking to, I think seeking to understand, and then um try and seek a solution, or um get everybody together to try and get some flexibility in what's happening. But there's differences, isn't there, between, you know, what is it? Is it neglect? Is it wounding? You know, needs not being met? Or is it a something that can be solved easily? I think that's to break it down in that way first, and then have a rethink. But again, children can be making these decisions from their emotional brain, rather than and I think attachment should be prioritized, so that, you know, children do have a relationship with both, if that's possible. But yeah, long-winded way to say understand first.
Yeah, and I think, perhaps I was misspoken. I think our answers are probably going to be quite close. There needs to be a reason, and I think you owe it to the child to sort of work that through. Now, I don't purport to be an expert on anything that you've spoken about this evening, Sarah, but my limited understanding is that children with autism struggle with change.
Mm.
So,
Mm. And
maybe
things not being the same, things being
right.
different.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
And it, you know,
if
sometimes
you
it can be, I don't like the food daddy cooks, you know,
right,
so it's just, is it something that can be solved, or is it something that's of serious concern?
and I think that this was a real question from somebody, and the reality of the situation is, if your relationship has only recently broken up, they are dealing with that huge change first. Now
Mm.
you've got another aspect of they're going into potentially a home that they don't know, a bedroom that they're not used to, a new surrounding, all of these kind of things, which naturally a child with autism is going to find harder. So I think what I'd like to hear in that scenario is that the father is being exceptionally understanding of that,
Mm.
and
Mm.
giving them the time that they need to get used to that new arrangement. Small steps. Like I say, I've got no knowledge about how best to deal with a scenario like that, but I can only imagine that it's small steps, reassurance, and it's going to build slowly, but you'll get there. But I'd
Yes,
like
there
to
is,
think,
absolutely, there is, it does help to have the awareness of how difficult this is for my
mm,
son.
mhm,
Absolutely. Moving house without divorce is traumatic enough. Because autism thrives on predictability, sameness, sensory predictability and sameness as well,
mm,
um, is huge. Um, and feeling safe. I feel safe and secure in my familiar environment. And I'm not sure whether I feel safe and secure in this different environment. So it's going across the, I referred to this earlier, the three pillars of psychological safety, which are relational, environmental, and sensory. And it's understanding what is different and what's problematical across those three pillars.
I couldn't agree more, Sarah. I think questioning and sort of getting to the bottom of why the child is having so much trouble is the first step. And then perhaps if it's specifically about dad's home, maybe we start with a park close to dad's house. Then maybe we deal a bit closer the next time we walk past the house and we say, look, this is where I live, and we keep walking. And then we build that slowly, because I think if you rush it, it's going to ruin it forever. And that kind of thing happens regardless of the child. If you rush them into something, they are more reticent to want to do it. So if we're looking at your specific scenario, it's going to be time, it's going to be real understanding. And if it is purely down to it's too much change, it's all these kind of things, that is going to have to be broken down over time. If there is a valid reason, daddy is mean to me, I'm just guessing at this point, daddy's mean to me, he's not very pleasant. Those are different things. Those are things that need to be discussed in a different way. But if it is more specifically to do with the autistic, side of things and getting ready for the change, that will have to be built slowly. So
yes, and just one more thing to add is it depends what daddy's doing while he's there. Is daddy working, online? Is daddy gaming online? Is daddy on his phone all the time? What am I being seen
yes,
when I'm there? Is huge as well. So yeah.
And that affects all children. They
Yeah,
all feel that.
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
I go there. I had a case a long time ago where it's like, well, why would I go there? Well, I go there, dad's on his Xbox for 3 hours, and then I come home again. And his partner basically looks after me. She makes me dinner. We sort of do my homework and I go home. So it is very much the why that we need to get the bottom of in that scenario. So we've already gone 10 minutes over, Sarah. There is one more question, but I can happily leave it there if that suits you. Or
No. I'll finish the questions.
wonderful. Okay, all right. I've got one lovely here. Definitely for you, Sarah, not for me. So I shall slink off into the background. How can you rebuild connection with an ADHD female adult after a tough divorce in childhood and ongoing conflict between the parents? Child does not forgive me for leaving.
That is hard for you to experience, isn't it? Forgiveness is all connected with acceptance, isn't it? But often I think it's more about your adult daughter hasn't processed her own feelings and grief about the separation, probably. So I think, again, you've got feelings and influencing behaviors. Also, sometimes people will not want to enter in conversations about repair or any sort of mediation or any counselling because they don't want to put themselves in a position of distress, because then they don't have the self-regulation tools to manage the distress. So it's sort of a vicious circle. So therefore I want to avoid distress, and any sort of approach at repair will put me into distress because I'll have to remember everything and I'll have to talk about it. And, I don't want to go there because I haven't processed my feelings. So it's mixture probably of grief that's presenting as anger and disconnection. So, sorry, how old is the adult daughter? can I ask?
Say, but I think it comes across that they're an adult. So I think we've had the divorce was while they were young.
Yeah,
And
it's quite
adult.
significant whether they're below 30 or above 30, though.
Let me double check. 23.
23, yeah. Technically, when I talk about that difference between IQ and EQ, it's highly likely that a neurodivergent 23-year-old will still be an adolescent in their thinking and behavioral styles. So again, reacting from the emotional brain, I suspect that it's anger that's preventing those conversations, or maybe and rejecting your attempts to repair. Is there any way that I'm asking the person that's asked the question, that you can stay in contact without the perceived pressure of repairing the relationship? So keep that communication going to say that you're still here, because I suspect that your daughter's not ready yet, but I suspect she will as she matures and hopefully has helped to process her situation. I would say that reflective thinking may be quite maybe not accessible at the moment, maybe yet. But I think to believe in the power of yet is really important, and to try and find ways maybe of having a presence in their life. I encouraged a dad I worked with, similar situation, but he was a teenager, to text him. Start small. We've talked about small steps. Start small. A text saying hi every week. Hi, build it up, maybe, whatever way seems appropriate to you and authentically you to communicate. They used to have a mutual interest in cricket and football. So he'd ask a neutral question like, what did you think of, the Arsenal game this weekend? Keeping it fairly neutral, if that's possible. If that's not, depending on where you're at. I mean, I'm a Christian, so I would pray about it a lot. But surrounding yourself with supportive people, managing your own feelings of grief about the relationship yourself. And my heart goes out to you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. That's so kind. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, Sarah. It's been an incredible talk. And for someone like myself who does my job every day, and this doesn't come up all the time, it's just so interesting. So I'm sure I speak for everyone at Stowe and just say thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for answering questions. And
just to say that you've on the slides, everyone will get the slides. If anyone wants to desperately ask a question but doesn't feel confident to ask on the call, just email me and I'll happily answer your question through email. So
wonderful. All right.
okay.
I think Susie's
All right then. Thanks for asking me to talk again, and thanks to everyone who showed up or is going to listen to this later on. It's lovely to work with you guys. Thank you.
Bless you. Thank you,
All
Sarah.
right then. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks
Get
so
out
much.
in that sunshine.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So evening, everyone. Hopefully that was helpful this month. And I can see here that the next one that we're doing together is on the 9th of July, and it's navigating divorce during the menopause. Very interesting topic. I think it's going to sort of be very important to sort of get some information about that. And I'll be here, the team will be here, we'll have a fantastic new speaker, as ever. And we invite you to come back, get your questions in the chat, We're always happy for you guys to engage. We enjoy that you engage so much, and we love doing these for you. So keep coming back, guys. If you need help, that's my dog pushing that door open. I think it's time to go. Right, so thank you so much, everyone, for turning up this evening, and we'll see you again on the 9th of July. See you then. Bye-bye.